Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are about to step into a universe that, honestly, completely shatters the boundaries between high fantasy, hard science fiction, and uh, deeply surreal psychological exploration.
It really does. It's an incredibly ambitious narrative.
Yeah, we're looking at a sprawling, massively complex lore from a manuscript titled Dystopia Final, all together now. And the sheer scale of this universe is staggering. I mean, it covers the birth of the cosmos, sentient microbes floating in space dust, ancient elemental dragons, and even these towering physical manifestations of concepts like addiction and fear.
Right, the lore is incredibly dense. If we tried to navigate the entire timeline, it would literally take us weeks.
Exactly. So our mission for you today is to carve out a highly specific, incredibly cinematic, self-contained epic that's hidden right within this larger mythology.
It's a fantastic section to focus on.
It really is. We are going to explore the story of Prince Draycophee, his living, breathing castle situated in the Kingdom of Mecca, and a spectacular interdimensional clash on a misty lake against an army of molten metal skeletons.
Which is quite the visual.
Oh, it's a completely wild narrative.
Yeah.
And we are going to break down every single mechanism of how this specific sanctuary operates.
And contextualizing the environment of the story is, well, it's the most vital first step, because we really have to understand the ground rules of the reality we're stepping into.
Right, because it's not normal fantasy.
No, not at all. If you picture a traditional fantasy setting, you usually have heroes acting upon a passive landscape. You know, they walk through forests, they climb mountains, they build castles out of quarried stone.
Right, the environment is just a backdrop.
Exactly. But the Kingdom of Mecca does not function that way. In this narrative, the environment itself is a conscious, responsive participant.
Which changes everything about how the characters interact with it.
Completely. We are looking at a universe where dimensions constantly bleed into one another, which creates this immense friction. And more importantly, it is a space where the forces of pure, primal nature are locked in a literal, physical battle against the manifestations of human greed and trauma.
It's intense.
It is. At its foundation, this is a deep exploration of what it means to build a sanctuary. It examines the corruption of innocence and the extreme reality-bending lengths that are required to protect that innocence from outside infection.
I'm really glad you brought up the idea of a conscious environment right out of the gate, because I want to invite you, our listener, to mentally step into this space as we map it out. I mean, imagine standing in a place where your surroundings are acutely aware of your intentions.
A very unsettling thought if your intentions aren't pure.
Exactly. Imagine a place where survival isn't about building thicker walls or forging heavier armor. It relies entirely on a symbiotic, almost conversational relationship with nature.
Every plant and rock matters.
Yeah, every plant, every rock formation, every shift in the weather serves a purpose. It's an ecosystem that actively defends itself. And at the center of this living ecosystem is the hero of our epic, Prince Draycophee.
He is a fascinating protagonist.
He really is. But to understand the prince, we can't just look at his actions on the battlefield. We have to look at how he came to exist in the first place.
His lineage is the foundational key to his character. He isn't just a royal who inherited a crown, you know. His genetic and magical makeup represents a major cosmological shift within the lore.
Right, because his parents are incredibly far from standard humanoid royalty. I mean, the prince is the son of the first king, Draco and Queen Fee. Let's start with King Draco, because his backstory carries so much psychological weight.
It really does. It's deeply tragic.
Draco originally wasn't humanoid at all. He was a dragonite. In this universe, dragonites were these massive, ancient, elemental beasts that were essentially forged by the planet itself to act as the ultimate immune system.
They were the planet's white blood cells, essentially.
That's a great way to put it. They were created to protect nature from a deeply corruptive, dark entity known simply as addiction. And Draco was the specific dragonite tied to the forest element.
Which gave him an incredible set of abilities.
Yeah, he had immortality, healing breath, scales, wings, a third eye that granted him immense perception. I mean, he was a literal force of nature, but he gives it all up.
It is a profound, tragic sacrifice that frames the entire history of Mecca. Because Draco doesn't lose his powers in a glorious battle. He gets tricked.
He gets lured into a cave by the whispers of that dark entity addiction. And this is where I was really trying to wrap my head around the lore when reading it. Like, why would an immortal elemental guardian willingly trade away his wings and his invulnerability.
Because the entity exploited the one thing an immortal, detached force of nature could never naturally possess.
Emotion.
Exactly. The chaotic, beautiful spectrum of humanoid emotion. Addiction promised Draco the ability to experience life not as a distant, towering guardian, but as a grounded, mortal being. He trades away his elemental magic and his immortality for a humanoid form, just so he can walk on two legs, feel the vulnerability of a mortal heartbeat, and ultimately experience the capacity to find love.
So addiction essentially uses his own curiosity against him.
Yes, it is a deception engineered by a dark force to remove a powerful piece from the board. But ironically, that very vulnerability is what leads Draco to Queen Fee.
And Queen Fee is another absolute cosmic heavyweight in this story.
She definitely is.
She is described as an entity of emanating green energy. She's the mother of wisdom, caring, and forgiveness. And she's the primary attendee to the growth of the planet's gardens.
Exactly. She's the pure, divine, nurturing energy of the planet. So when you look at Prince Delanium draycophee, you have to realize what he represents.
He's the synthesis of all of that.
Right. He is the literal bridge between the ancient elemental magic of the planet, meaning his father's original dragonite heritage, and his mother's divine green energy, and the newly evolving emotional, mortal, humanoid races.
It's a huge burden for one person.
It is. He is the offspring of an immortal's ultimate sacrifice for love, combined with the pure life force of nature.
Which makes his character profile so fascinating to me, because he is described as a freedom fighter, a lover, and an adventurer.
Very dynamic descriptors.
Yeah, he's a young man still trying to figure out his place in the world. But he is tasked with ruling a kingdom that operates without borders or walls.
Which goes back to the environmental philosophy of Mecca.
Right. His specific domain is this incredible hidden sanctuary. It's a misty valley cove completely nestled between mystic tree mountains. And the sensory details of this place are incredibly vivid.
The defenses of this sanctuary are a perfect reflection of that conscious environment we discussed earlier. The valley isn't fortified by masonry.
No brick walls here.
Right. It's guarded by natural formations and flora that have adapted to repel specific types of threats.
Yeah, the perimeter is surrounded by these sharp, jagged rock formations.
Yeah.
And they are specifically meant to keep mindless, wandering giants from just stumbling into the cove.
A very practical first layer of defense.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And once you get past the rocks, you enter the fog. And this isn't just normal weather. There's a low-rolling fog that sits in the valley, and it moves with intention.
It's almost alive.
Exactly. It covers everything below the knees. It creates this immediate, visceral feeling that you are wading through a dream state. It actively obscures the ground, making any intruder hesitant, slowing their pace, and creating an atmosphere of deep uncertainty.
It messes with your perception right away.
It really does. But I think the most brilliant defense mechanism has to be the melisma flowers.
Oh, the elephant flowers. This is where the biological defenses become highly psychological.
Yes.
The melisma flowers are entirely hypnotic. They don't just bloom, they whisper.
It's like weaponized storytelling.
That's exactly what it is.
The manuscript says they constantly chatter from bloom to blossom, endlessly passing never-ending stories back and forth across the valley.
And the sheer volume of these layered, whispering narratives becomes an overwhelming cognitive overload for anyone who isn't attuned to the frequency of the valley.
So if you don't belong there, you just get overwhelmed.
Exactly. Any hostile intruder who wanders into a field of melisma flowers quickly becomes disoriented. Their own internal monologue gets completely drowned out by the hypnotic chatter of the flora.
That would be terrifying.
They lose their sense of direction, their sense of purpose, and ultimately they just get lost in this blanketing field of stories. It is a non-lethal psychological defense mechanism engineered by the planet to protect the sanctuary's core.
I find that concept so incredibly creative. But of course, if the whispering flowers don't deter a heavier threat, the trees step in.
The heavy artillery.
Yeah, the valley is ringed with poisonous blue gum pines that act like organic barbed wire against trolling droves of giant monsters.
They're highly reactive.
Right. These trees excrete a highly acidic sap that burns any flesh it touches. So you have a sanctuary that is beautiful, mysterious, but heavily fortified by its own ecosystem.
It's a fortress of biology.
But the prince doesn't just rely on the plants. He has an inner circle. He has his royal entourage. And this introduces a completely unexpected, deeply humorous grounding element to the story.
We have to talk about Pickle and Podge.
We absolutely have to talk about Pickle and Podge. They are fantastic. They are twin boar pigmen.
A great visual.
The description given in the text is so affectionate yet blunt. It says they are a very ugly pair of hairy, dull, half-witted, tusk-faced brothers.
But highly effective.
Very. They're heavily armored, constantly sarcastic, and fiercely, unconditionally loyal to Prince Delanium. They serve as his personal protectors and his primary advisors.
In a narrative filled with emanating green energy entities, cosmic portals, and elemental dragons, having two grumpy, heavily armored pigmen complaining about their day-to-day duties is brilliant.
It really balances the tone.
It does.
Yeah.
It pulls the high fantasy down to a relatable, grounded reality. They provide friction and texture to the prince's life.
There is an anecdote in the text that perfectly captures this dynamic. The prince, despite his grand cosmic lineage, is still a young guy with humanoid emotions. He's going through a bit of an arrogant, rebellious phase.
As young royals do.
Right. And he manages to get himself locked in a holding cell inside a local bounty cavern.
Which is not very princely.
Not at all. And why is he there? Because he got completely intoxicated and loudly confessed his love to a tavern barmaid, who, by the way, happens to be a troll 7 times his age and weight.
A detail that completely deflates any notion of him being an untouchable, perfect, stoic hero.
It humanizes him instantly.
Yeah.
So the prince is sitting in this damp holding cell, nursing a massive hangover, and he is loudly complaining that Pickle and Podge are the worst friends in the universe for letting him get locked up.
Blaming everyone but himself.
Of course. Meanwhile, Pickle and Podge are standing just outside the cell, completely out of his line of sight, having a casual debate. They're trying to decide if they should let him sit in there a little longer to truly sober up.
There's no rush.
No rush at all. One of them suggests waiting a bit and then giving the prince a bath of powdered moths.
Which sounds awful.
Right, and the other one just nods and says, yeah, then we can eat the moths after.
It's absurd, but it functions beautifully to show the listener who the prince really is at this stage of his life. He is a flawed, highly emotional young man carrying an immense burden.
And his protectors act less like royal guards and more like exasperated, slightly unhygienic older brothers.
Exactly. It strips away the pomp and circumstance of royalty.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this flawed but powerful prince, his heavily armed Borman companions, and this deeply defended Misty Valley. But where does the prince actually lay his head at night?
The architecture of his home is fascinating.
It is. This is where the world building shifts from the environment to the architecture. The prince's home in the kingdom of Mecca is not a fortress built from dead, quarried stone. It is a small castle made entirely of living vines and moving trees.
The architecture is a direct physical manifestation of Mecca's underlying philosophy.
How so?
Well, think about a traditional stone castle. It's an imposition on the landscape. It requires destroying the earth to build a rigid structure that resists the environment. But the prince's castle is an organism.
It's grown, not built.
Right. It is grown, and it consists of multiple living botanical entities existing as one cohesive symbiotic unit.
This castle actually breathes and shifts. The text says the rooms move dynamically. If a sudden threat appears, a room that is currently exposed on the roof can be rapidly pulled underground by the root system for safety.
Which is an incredible defense mechanism.
And the vines constantly separate and weave back together to share sunlight equally across the structure. The entire building shifts to accommodate the needs of both its inhabitants and the surrounding ecosystem.
And this perfectly embodies the core creed of the Kingdom of Mecca, which is, if it harms none, do what you will.
I love that creed.
It's central to the story. The castle requires absolute, unbroken harmony with nature to function. It doesn't dominate, it participates. It is an adaptive sanctuary rather than a resistive fortress.
Because it can just avoid the hit.
Exactly. When you have a building that can physically move to protect you, it fundamentally changes how you approach conflict. You don't have to absorb a blow if your home can simply shift out of the way. It's a gorgeous metaphor for the kind of fluid, connected leadership the prince is meant to represent.
But a living castle still requires maintenance, right? It needs someone to tend to the vines, guide the root systems, and ensure the harmony remains unbroken.
And that job belongs to one of the most compelling characters in the entire lore.
Mr. Rhino.
Mr. Rhino, the groundskeeper, the mentor, and the master blacksmith.
Mr. Rhino is a massive, hulking rhinoceros man. He acts as the ultimate protector of the sanctuary's grounds. He lives in a tin-lined hut on the edge of the property where he hoards junk metal, melting it down in his forge to craft armor and massive weapons.
He's an imposing figure.
Very imposing. But despite his intimidating physical presence, he is a deeply gentle soul. He spends the vast majority of his time tending to healing herbs, cultivating vegetable gardens, and surviving on a highly specific, eccentric diet.
Organic wafers and cricket jam.
Organic wafers and cricket jam.
He's a creature of immense physical power who chooses a life of quiet, meticulous cultivation.
But Mr. Rhino's role extends far beyond horticulture and metallurgy. He is the custodian of the sanctuary's most complex piece of technology.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, because this device introduces a jarring yet cohesive science fiction element into this fantasy ecosystem. The vision box.
The vision box.
I need to understand how we jump from elemental dragons and whispering flowers to a quantum computer. Because in his downtime, while snacking on his cricket jam, Mr. Rhino sits in his tin hut and watches what is essentially interdimensional television.
That's practically what it is.
He has constructed a cosmic quantum computer powered by glowing purple dilithium crystals. How does this manuscript reconcile that blend of magic and hard sci-fi?
It reconciles it by treating magic and advanced quantum physics as 2 points on the exact same spectrum.
Okay, that makes sense.
The dilithium crystals act as an organic mechanical hybrid battery. They'd harness the raw, ambient cosmic energy of the valley and focus it through Mr. Rhino's quantum device.
So it's powered by the environment.
Yes. This allows the vision box to pierce the veil between realities. It tunes into the frequencies of the multiverse, allowing Mr. Rhino to observe parallel dimensions, alternate timelines, and distant galaxies without ever physically leaving his hut. It serves as a cosmic observatory.
And he uses it like he's binge-watching soap operas.
He really does.
He tunes into the lives, the tragedies, and the romances of people in entirely different dimensions. He gets deeply emotionally invested in their struggles, weeping tears of joy or sorrow into an oversized tissue as he watches human lives unfold across the multiverse.
It is incredibly endearing.
It is. But this device is also the catalyst for the spectacular climax of our story. Because one day, Mr. Rhino tunes his vision box to a dimension that is currently experiencing a catastrophic crisis.
This is where the disparate, isolated threads of the multiverse violently collide with the tranquility of Mecca.
Through the vision box, we are introduced to a woman named Lucky Eliza and her lover, Joe.
And their world is very different from Mecca.
Very different. They exist in a reality that looks much more like our modern world. They have concrete, cars, and highly classified military bases. But their reality has been invaded by a horrific supernatural force that has been systematically abducting children, including the son of a high-ranking military captain.
It is a scenario defined by panic, trauma, and a desperate, failing military response.
Exactly. The military attempts a highly classified, incredibly dangerous operation involving a captive psychic and an experimental portal to track down the missing children.
And it goes terribly wrong.
It catastrophically backfires. The portal destabilizes, and Joe is violently sucked into a wormhole, dragged into an alternate nightmare dimension.
And Lucky Eliza reacts immediately.
Yeah, driven by absolute, unadulterated rage and deep love, she refuses to let him go. She throws herself into the destabilizing dimensional rift. She literally physically punches her way through the fabric of reality to get him back.
The scientific mechanics of how she survives that transit are secondary to the emotional velocity she carries.
Emotion over physics.
Right. She becomes a projectile of pure willpower, tearing through the boundaries of space and time. And her trajectory lands her directly in the center of Prince Delanium's sanctuary.
The sensory shock of her arrival is stunning. She violently materializes in the dead center of the prince's misty lake. She hits the freezing water, thrashing and gasping for air.
It's a rude awakening.
Very. She looks up, and the thick, low-rolling fog slowly parts to reveal a colossal, glittering ice glacier reflecting the ambient light of the valley. It is a completely serene, hyper-magical environment that sits in stark, jarring contrast to the violent military concrete and trauma she just hurled herself away from.
And then, cutting through the silence, a small wooden boat emerges from the fog.
Navigated by Prince Delanium, flanked by Pickle and Podge.
The welcoming committee.
The boat hits the shoreline, and the prince steps off. And he looks every inch the warrior of the wild.
His appearance is striking here.
Yeah, he is wearing a heavy leather belt, a thick armored shoulder strap, and sandaled shoes. His chest is bare, and he has these long, wild, mud-rusted blonde locks. And the instant his boots hit the ground, he draws his sword and points the blade directly at Lucky Eliza's throat.
The tension here is immense, but there is a complex duality to this encounter.
What do you mean?
Because as they lock eyes, a profound, almost cosmic recognition occurs between them. The text says they look so remarkably similar that they could be mistaken for long-lost twins separated across the multiverse.
Wow, so there's an instant connection.
Yes. The prince instantly senses her desperation, her trauma, and her humanity. But simultaneously, as the protector of this delicate ecosystem, he senses the catastrophic danger she poses simply by existing in a dimension she does not belong in.
Right, because the environmental responsiveness kicks in immediately.
Exactly.
Lucky Eliza actually looks down and realizes that her mere presence, the ambient body heat of an entity from a foreign dimension, is violently reacting with the magic of the valley. She is starting to melt the magical crystal ice beneath her feet.
Her very existence here is a violation of the dimensional laws, and the environment is breaking down because of it.
The prince sees this. He slowly lowers his sword, recognizing she isn't an intentional threat. But he delivers a stark warning. He says, "You have very little time. You must be quick. You don't belong here. Your very presence can cause destruction."
And then he leaves.
Yeah. Without another word, he turns, boards his boat, and vanishes back into the whispering fog, leaving her alone on the beach.
And this sequence introduces what has to be one of the most brilliant, surreal shifts in perspective in the entire narrative.
The rhino perspective.
Yes, because while this incredibly intense, high-stakes, dramatic encounter is unfolding on the shores of the misty lake, we have to pull back and look at what Mr. Rhino is doing at this exact moment.
It is pure meta-narrative genius. Mr. Rhino is sitting in his tin hut, peacefully eating his organic wafers, watching his vision box.
Just enjoying his show.
Right. He is completely captivated by the interdimensional broadcast of this terrified woman arriving in a strange land and being confronted by a warrior. He is emotionally gripped by the screen. And then he slowly turns his head, casually looks out his physical window,
And
realizes he can see the exact same thing happening right outside his hut on his own lake.
the boundary between the observer and the observed completely collapses here.
It must have been mind-blowing for him.
Mr. Rhino experiences a moment of profound existential shock. The interdimensional television show he's been watching from a safe, detached distance has violently crashed onto his front lawn.
He drops his wafers, completely panics, and uses his massive rhinoceros strength to just smash straight through the tin wall of his own hut.
He doesn't even use the door.
No, he just breaks the wall and bellows at the top of his lungs, "I can smell you, I know you're there."
It is objectively hilarious.
It is. But the humor evaporates almost instantly. Because Mr. Rhino's sudden awareness signals that the sanctuary has been formally breached. And the true horror is that Lucky Eliza didn't punch through the dimensional rift alone. Something followed her.
The tone of the narrative violently pivots here. We leave the realm of surreal wonder and step directly into visceral, suffocating horror.
The supernatural threat that had been abducting children in Eliza's home world, the nightmare she and Joe have been desperately fleeing, has tracked their interdimensional wake. They have breached the portal and entered the kingdom of Mecca.
The Skellingtons.
They're referred to as the Skellingtons.
Yeah.
And if you, listening right now, are picturing a standard clattering mob of Halloween skeletons, you need to completely erase that image.
Yes, these entities are a profound physical manifestation of deep corruption.
The visual description is incredibly grim. These are armored, entirely fleshless horrors. But their bones are thickly draped in melting liquid gold and silver.
A terrible sight.
As they march, their bodies run incredibly hot, leaving burning, scorched footprints of molten metal that sizzle and then harden into rigid slag in the cool air of the misty valley. They wield massive, dark, heavy swords forged from the black abyss. They are a waking nightmare.
The symbolism here is incredibly dense and crucial to understanding the conflict.
Break that down for us.
Well, these Skellingtons were dispatched by the Dark Mountain, a territory ruled by the colossal entity Addiction and his daughter, Princess Ashtasha.
And Addiction is the same entity that tricked the prince's father.
Exactly. These molten skeletons represent pure, unadulterated, suffocating greed. That is why they are draped in heavy liquid gold and silver. Wealth, in this context, is not a tool. It is a burden that burns away life. They literally feed on the pain, fear, and misery of abducted, innocent children.
So they are the absolute antithesis of the living castle.
Precisely. Think about it. The Prince's Castle operates on the philosophy of shifting, living, and harmonizing with nature. It is light and adaptable. The Skellingtons are heavy, dead, and rigid.
They just consume.
Right. They exist only to consume, to hoard, and to corrupt the natural order. They are a localized, highly concentrated infection of greed, aggressively expanding into a sanctuary of pure nature.
And their arrival triggers an incredibly chaotic, cinematic chase sequence. I
Yeah.
mean, imagine the visual contrast. It is night in the Misty Valley. Joe, who has miraculously managed to locate and rescue a small group of the abducted children, is frantically leading them through the terrain. He's trying to get them onto a makeshift wooden raft on the edge of the freezing lake.
That's so close to safety.
But the dark, mystic pine forest behind him is suddenly illuminated. And it isn't torchlight. It is the eerie, suffocating glow of hundreds of these molten, skeletal horrors violently bursting through the tree line.
You're just destroying everything in their path.
They are burning the whispering melisma flowers to ash beneath their feet, swinging their abyssal swords, closing the distance rapidly.
And notice how the delicate psychological defenses of the valley are entirely useless against an enemy that possesses no mind to hypnotize and no flesh to burn.
The elephant flowers can't whisper to dead bone.
Exactly. The environment is being actively trampled by burning metal and dead bone.
Lucky Eliza is on the opposite shore when they break through the tree line. She sees Joe. She sees the terrified children huddled on the raft. And she sees this glowing horde of melting gold skeletons bearing down on them.
And she doesn't hesitate.
Without a microsecond of hesitation, she dives straight back into the freezing water. She swims with incredible, desperate speed, gliding through the low, rolling mist like a dolphin, pushing her physical limits to cross the lake and reunite with Joe on that raft before the monsters reach the shoreline.
The tension is exquisitely drawn out here. You have a fragile wooden raft loaded with traumatized children, a couple trying to reunite across the span of an interdimensional rift, and an unstoppable, unfeeling army of metal-draped undead closing the gap.
It is an impossible tactical situation.
It really is.
But the Skellingtons made a fatal tactical error. You do not invade the physical grounds of the Kingdom of Mecca without answering to the groundskeeper.
Enter Mr. Rhino.
Mr. Rhino, who has just boosted through the wreckage of his own hut, assesses the battlefield in a fraction of a second. He immediately realizes that the children are terrified, and their intense, radiating emotional beacon of fear is acting as a homing signal for these predators.
He knows they're drawn to the fear.
Right. He knows he cannot evacuate them fast enough, so he has to physically cut off the horde.
What follows is a stunning synthesis of primal physical power and environmental mastery. Mr. Rhino doesn't just run to intercept them. He utilizes the unique physics of the Misty Valley.
It's an incredible image.
He lets out this vibrating, earth-shattering war cry. It is a sound so deep and resonant that it vibrates through the very bedrock of the cove.
And then he leverages the density of the magic fog. He literally surfs across the thick mist as if it were a solid physical mass.
Defying gravity.
He glides over the surface of the freezing lake with absolute terrifying ferocity. He hits the shoreline like a meteor, planting his massive, hulking, armored rhinoceros body directly in the mud between the fragile raft of children and the advancing burning horde.
He transforms himself into a living, immovable wall.
And he brings his massive blacksmith hammer to bear. The mechanics of this combat are brutal, visceral, and incredibly satisfying.
It's an overwhelming display of force.
Mr. Rhino is swinging this immense hammer with such kinetic force, such concentrated physical might, that when the iron connects with the molten gold skulls of these creatures, the bones do not shatter.
They disintegrate.
The sheer force of the impact causes the skulls to literally evaporate into dust. He is systematically dismantling the darkness with the raw, unyielding rage of a protector.
While protecting the raft.
Yes. With one massive arm, he is obliterating these golden horrors into metallic mist, and with his other arm, he reaches back, grabs the edge of the raft, and violently shoves it out into the deep water, physically separating the innocents from the burning shoreline.
It is a phenomenal display of martial defense. But Mr. Rhino's physical strength, no matter how immense, only solves half the problem.
Right, because there are still so many of them.
He can hold the line, but he cannot close the dimensional breach. And he cannot return these abducted children to their rightful reality. The physical threat is being managed, but the cosmic threat remains. That requires a completely different frequency of power.
And this is exactly where the Prince of the Wild steps into his lineage. Prince Delanium emerges from the trees and surveys the chaos. He sees the overwhelming, endless numbers of the molten horde pouring out of the forest.
He sees what needs to be done.
He sees Mr. Rhino holding the line, a solitary mountain of muscle against an ocean of burning gold. But the prince knows the primary objective isn't just killing the enemy, It's securing an exit route for the children.
They have to get out of Mecca.
Exactly. He realizes he cannot accomplish this with a sword, so he turns to the technological magic of his sanctuary. He sprints to the wreckage of Mr. Rhino's hut and goes directly to the vision box.
He takes a passive tool of observation and weaponizes its quantum mechanics.
Precisely. He bypasses the viewing protocols and completely overclocks the glowing purple dilithium crystals. He channels his own immense cosmic energy, that deep, benign power inherited from his parents, directly into the battery of the quantum computer.
Pushing it far beyond its limits.
The device reaches a critical mass, and the prince aims a concentrated, blinding beam of pure purple light directly across the lake, targeting the space just in front of the drifting raft.
By forcibly injecting that much concentrated cosmic energy into a single focal point, the prince violently bends the laws of space and time.
It's an incredible sequence.
He forces a spontaneous rupture in the fabric of the multiverse, tearing open a glowing, swirling wormhole right in the path of the raft.
The physics of the extraction are incredibly dynamic here. The sudden opening of the dimensional rift creates a massive vacuum effect. The raft, carrying Joe, Lucky Eliza, and the rescued children, is caught in this intense, localized gravitational pull.
They don't even have to paddle.
No. The rushing water and sheer momentum propel them forward, lifting the wooden raft up and violently sucking it into the purple terror in reality. They are blasted out of the nightmare dimension, hurtling back toward their home reality just as the prince cuts the power.
The portal violently collapses in on itself and vanishes instantly, leaving no trace it was ever there. The innocents make it out.
The dimensional balance is momentarily restored by forcefully ejecting the foreign, vulnerable elements. The children are safe.
But the sanctuary of Mecca is still infected. The skeletons remain, burning the shores of the misty lake.
But the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. Because with the innocents safely evacuated across the multiverse, Prince Delanium Draycophee no longer has to hold back his power.
The gloves come off.
The burden of protection has been lifted, leaving only the imperative of retaliation. The prince draws his sword, lets out a massive echoing roar, and charges down the shoreline to join Mr. Rhino in the mud.
Tapping into that Dragonite heritage.
He completely unleashes the ancient elemental wrath of his Dragonite father and the protective fury of his mother. He wades directly into the thick of the remaining putrid hunters, his blade a blur of motion.
It's a total rout.
He fights with total, unrestrained savagery, systematically decimating every single molten horror that dared to step foot in his valley. The warrior of the wild defends his living, breathing sanctuary, carving through the manifestations of suffocating greed until the shoreline falls silent.
Leaving nothing behind but cooling, hardened puddles of slag metal and evaporating bone dust.
It is a breathtaking, cathartic resolution to an intensely chaotic battle.
It really is.
Watching the prince systematically dismantle these creatures on the shore, it really forces you to step back and look at the sheer scale of what just happened. We just saw high fantasy magic collide head-on with quantum sci-fi.
A very tricky blend to pull off.
We had giant boremen and living castles, alongside interdimensional portals and physics-bending quantum computers. But it all holds together.
It holds together because of the immense strength of its underlying thematic architecture.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the Kingdom of Mecca, the Living Castle, the Prince, Mr. Rhino, they all function as interconnected nodes within a highly sensitive, delicate ecosystem.
Right.
The mist, the flora, the walls of the castle, they physically and magically react to the spiritual intentions of the entities within them.
So they respond to what the visitors bring.
Exactly. When Lucky Eliza arrived carrying desperate, chaotic love, the magic ice melted beneath her feet. When the skeletons arrived, draped in molten gold, carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of greed and a hunger for fear, the environment provided the necessary tools for the prince and Mr. Rhino to repel them.
The skeletons were a literal physical infection. They represented the ultimate hoarding of wealth. Gold and silver melted down to armor, a rotting core.
A perfect metaphor.
And they were ultimately defeated by the combined forces of pure, unyielding physical nature, represented by Mr. Rhino swinging a blacksmith's hammer, and focused enlightened cosmic energy represented by the prince, utilizing the dilithium crystals to manipulate space-time.
It is the triumph of an adaptive, living ecosystem over base, consuming, rigid greed.
That's beautifully said.
The narrative makes a profound argument here. True sanctuary cannot exist in a vacuum. It requires both the raw physical strength to establish and defend boundaries and the enlightened wisdom to channel your energy toward protecting the innocent rather than hoarding power.
Which brings this entire epic right to your doorstep. Think about how you cultivate your own spaces. In your daily life, when the modern skeletons of anxiety, of corporate greed, or the relentless chaos of the outside world come marching aggressively onto your shores, what do your defenses look like?
Are they adaptable?
Right. Do you rely on rigid, dead stone walls that eventually crack under pressure? Or do you cultivate a living, adaptable fortress that can shift, breathe, and protect your peace of mind?
It's a great question.
Do you have your own personal pickle and podge? Friends who can cut through your arrogance with sarcasm and keep you grounded?
We all need a pickle and podge.
Definitely. Do you have a Mr. Rhino in your corner? Someone willing to stand in the mud and swing a hammer to protect your boundaries when you are overwhelmed? It is deeply worth examining who and what makes up the ecosystem of your personal sanctuary.
It serves as a beautiful, profound metaphor for mental and emotional resilience. But there is one final, overarching layer to this manuscript that fundamentally changes how we view everything we just discussed.
Oh, right, the universe bubble theory.
Yes. Throughout the deeper lore of the text, there is a recurring, deeply complex mathematical theory proposed by a far-off scholar.
Okay.
This theory suggests that the universe is not a static void. It posits that reality itself is essentially a massive, expanding bubble, created and sustained entirely by the sheer kinetic force of imagination.
So the mind powers the universe.
The mathematics of the manuscript argue that every single thought a sentient being has actually acts like a physical proton.
Wait, so the act of imagining something literally generates a physical particle?
Yes. The text argues that every vivid daydream, every deep-seated fear, and every lingering hope forcefully pops into existence, generating a literal physical reality somewhere out there in the vast expanse of the multiverse.
That's wild. So Mr. Rhino's vision box wasn't just tuning into random planets.
No, it was observing the physical manifestations of imagination.
That implies an immense, almost terrifying level of responsibility.
It does, because if that theory holds true within the context of our own lives, if every thought we dwell upon is actively constructing reality somewhere, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of world are your thoughts currently building?
Wow.
When you close your eyes and let your mind wander, are your thoughts meticulously growing a living castle of vines? Are you cultivating a sanctuary of harmony, light, and protection? Or are your anxieties, your fears, and your grievances unwittingly feeding a dark mountain of ash, giving physical mass and power to the molten skeletons of your own design?
That is a staggering concept to carry with you. Are you building a living castle or a dark mountain? We want to thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly dense, deeply wild, and ultimately beautiful deep dive into the mechanics of Dystopia Final, all together now.
It's been quite the journey.
It really has. We hope you enjoyed navigating the Misty Lake and the quantum mechanics of the Kingdom of Mecca as much as we did. Keep exploring your own ecosystems, keep building your sanctuaries, and above all, keep your imaginations wild. Until next time.